Hello, guys. It's me, the Blue Princess 590, back for the next episode of my podcast, The Mad Rabblings of a Blue Princess. And for today's episode, I'm going to be talking about the hot new anime movie that everybody's talking about. Boy, did that sound lame. I will try to avoid saying stuff like that again in the future because it sounds lame-o, 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 lame-o. But yeah, I'm going to be talking about Across the Spider-Verse, which I saw earlier this week on Tuesday, and yeah, this movie really is as good as everybody says it is. And just to let you guys know right now that I'm going to be spoiling the entire movie. Like, I'm not even gonna have a non-spoiler section because I don't think there's really anything I could really say about this movie besides just saying what happens in the trailers that wouldn't spoil it, because there's so much I want to talk about, so much in depth, and I don't want to, I don't know, I feel like it'd be a waste of time if I spent most of this movie just sort of summarizing the plot and giving thoughts on just the non-spoiler stuff, because in my opinion, the main reason why you watch the main appeal of watching podcasts about new movies and stuff is to see what other people have to think and what they have to analyze about the new movie when it comes out. But yeah, this is going to be full on spoilers discussion. I'm going to be talking about spoilers real soon. So if you have not seen the movie, just don't watch this podcast. Come come again later after you've seen the movie, and then you can watch my podcast. That is, of course, if you care about spoilers. If you don't care about spoilers, then feel free to watch as I spoil the ever-loving... Huh. I was trying to come up with a funny phrase, but I can't come up with anything, so I'm just going to give out that and say, yeah, okay, spoiler time. Let's go. Okay, so Across the Spider-Verse, I'm just going to start off what I think is, the most interesting, thematic part about this movie, about Across the Spider-Verse. Not even going to try to, go in, chronological order. I'm just going to talk about the thing that I want to talk about the most right now. Okay, so basically, in the movie, it's revealed that there are specific events that have to happen across all realities in order to keep them connected to the multiverse. Because if they don't, that'll result in the universe becoming detached from reality, and eventually collapsing in on itself. Basically, they refer to these as canon events. Basically, things that have to happen are consistent across all realities, and specifically, they are tragedies that befall every Spider-Man. Not only the specific death of their uncles or loved ones in the form of their Uncle Ben moments, but as the film reveals, it's also their Captain Stacy death moments. The idea that a police captain close to a Spider-Man in every universe at some point dies saving a child, and this effect ends up having a deep, tragic impact on the character. And of course, Miles realized that his dad is becoming captain, and his captain is the one who's going to die at the hands of the Spot trying to save a kid. And of course, Miles wants to stop this event, whereas the other Spider people, especially Miguel, Spider-Man 2099, wants to stop Miles from changing this event because it could threaten the very fabric of reality, and it could destroy the multiverse. And I think this is the most interesting part of the film, because it is basically creating a conflict, a moral dilemma between Miles and the other Spider-Man that shows why Miles truly is the best of them. Because here's the thing about the whole preserving these canon events, basically letting people die to make sure a universe isn't destroyed, is that it goes against everything Spider-Man is supposed to represent. The entire idea of Spider-Man, specifically because is that if you have the whole great power, great responsibilities mindset, is that if you have the power to help people, if you can do something good, you have to do it. You cannot stand by and let anybody die because you do nothing. Basically, by allowing these kind of events to happen, these Spider-Mans are basically resigning themselves to do nothing and let somebody die in order to preserve some sort of greater good. But that goes against everything Spider-Man stands for, because the whole reason that they became Spider-Man was because they did nothing, and so somebody they loved in turn died because of it. And so, basically, this whole preserving the canon events is causing the Spider-Mans to go against everything they believe in, to go to what is the ultimate betrayal of their ideals in the name of a greater good. And that's sort of why I think this is such a perfect conflict in the movie, because you get why especially Miguel is trying to stop Miles, and why he's so dead set on enforcing these canon events, because in his mind he's trying to preserve the greater good. Because in his mind, the ultimate responsibility they have to preserve is helping the most people, saving the most lives, and preventing the most deaths. But by doing so, you are still letting somebody die, and it's actually betraying the entire ideals behind what it means to be Spider-Man. And that is why Miles is opposing all these Spider-Men and trying to, like, it's not just about saving his dad. It's specifically about, like, refusing to let somebody die, to stand by and do nothing when you could do something, because that's the whole part of being Spider-Man. That is the whole that is the whole reason behind the Uncle Ben moments. That if you have great power, that you have the responsibility to do something to help people. You can never ever turn a blind eye, especially if you have the power to help them. And eventually, and I love this conflict because it's not only like it's of course a meta commentary on like how different Spider-Man stories, regardless of the mediums or who writing it, are bound to these specific rules established with the character. That's why they call it canon events, because it's a literal meta narrative. But they make it a literal part of the story by making it a literal rule in universe and having that rule clash with the ideals of being a Spider-Man, resulting in a perfect conflict where Miles has to go against the other Spider-Man, not just to save the people he loves, but also to preserve his own ideals, as well as the true ideals that the Spider-Man are supposed to follow, but are essentially betraying because they are so law-bound by these canon events. And I think this is just so brilliant because it's distilling the core element that sort of makes Spider-Man a character and sort of showing us not only why it matters, not only why Miles is perfect for upholding this true aspect that truly makes somebody a Spider-Man. The idea that it's basically taking the idea of anybody can wear the mask from the first movie and sort of sort of like expanding on it in the story of somebody trying to hold on to what if anybody can wear the mask, what do they have to do to keep the mask? If they can be Spider-Man, what do they have to do to stay Spider-Man? And Miles shows that he is the one person who can truly be Spider-Man by upholding this ideal, by doing the right thing, even when the universe says he's not supposed to, when all the other Spider-Men are sort of like are like putting their head down and following these rules despite the fact that they know they're wrong. And I love this. And I also want to talk a bit more about Miguel, specifically why I think he is so aggressive to Miles and why he's so angry at him. And the main reason, and it comes across like he's sort of blaming Miguel for stuff he did isn't really his fault, but and there's a good reason why I think there is a good character driven reason why Miguel acts this way, why he seems so angry, why he seems to keep constantly mistreat Miles, and why he's so aggressive towards him is specifically because Miguel is projecting his own self-loathing onto Miles. Because something Miguel mentions they did in this universe is that he discovered an alternate reality where he was a normal person living happily with his own family, and when that version of him died, he went to that reality and took his place and basically replaced him because he wanted to live this happier life. And Miguel made a very selfish and almost self-serving choice, basically abandoning his reality and responsibilities in order to live another life and take another version of himself's responsibilities because he liked that life, because he wanted that happier life. And while Miguel, of course, isn't responsible for his death, there is definitely a lot to question about the ethics of basically stealing an alternate version of yourself, of replacing an alternate version of yourself's life. Not stealing, but replacing. Yeah, but Miguel basically he made a more or less selfish choice, and this resulted in that universe becoming detached from the rest of reality and breaking. So his new surrogate family, that reality, not only died along with the rest of the universe, but Miguel is like personally responsible for the death of an entire universe and countless innocent people. And this and I think this is why Miguel is so angry at Miles, because he sees himself in Miles. He feels like Miles is making the sort of same mistakes as him. So he's taking all his anger, he's taking all his regret and self-loathing, and he's putting it all on Miles because he is projecting this. And I don't think he's definitely not doing this intentionally. This is more of a subconscious thing. But like, yeah, Miguel is basically like projecting all of his self-loathing onto this teenager kid, and that is making him act so much angrier to Miles. And I think what fuels this is this revelation, basically in the film, that Miles himself is a irregularity. That the spider that bit him came from another dimension and was never supposed to bite him. It was supposed to bite the Spider-Man of that universe, but because of it, Miles instead, and basically like did that. It not only like made Miles Spider-Man when he was never supposed to, but it also made it so that universe lost a Spider-Man
and it also resulted in the death of Miles's original Spider-Man, like his Peter Parker, because he became the Spider-Man of that universe. That resulted in the death of that universe's Peter, who died trying to save Miles, and it basically resulted in a huge bunch of a it basically created, because the spider bit Miles when it wasn't supposed to, it basically caused a huge irregularity within the multiverse that is resulting in all these glitches and all these holes and all these problems, and that basically Miguel has been stuck trying to keep everything together after these like series of events that not only led to Miles becoming Spider-Man, but holes the Spider-Verse essentially breaking down, and also the creation of the Spot. And here's the thing, though. None of this is Miles' fault. This is really the Spot's fault, because he's the one who brought that spider from the universe in here. Like, none of this is Miles' fault. He didn't choose to get bitten. He didn't cause this. But because these events sort of happened in relationship to Miles, this Miles becoming Spider-Man is indirectly responsible for all these events. Miguel is projecting all of his self-loathing onto Miles as a result. So basically, like, he's taking all this anger and frustration that he can't really pin on anyone else besides himself, and he's pinning it on Miles instead. Now, I don't think he's doing this intentionally, of course. I mentioned that before. Like, it is unfair of Miguel, this adult, to project all this anger and self-loathing onto this kid and blame him for stuff that isn't really his fault. Because again, though, Spot was the one who brought the spider from another dimension into this reality. But yeah, I especially really like this idea that like Miles as a Spider-Man is an in-universe irregularity, and that like the idea that he wasn't supposed to be Spider-Man, because it's essentially, this has been confirmed by like the people who made the movie, like I believe the directors and writers, because I saw like in an interview they did that this was supposed to be like a call out to the people who don't see Miles as a true Spider-Man. These people who like don't like Miguel, his whole like you were never supposed to be Spider-Man is basically like a meant to be reflect the people who hate Miles and don't think he's a true Spider-Man. It's sort of like a meta commentary on them, and that sort of like that hateful, that anger, aggressive, and sort of like directly opposing it in the film, because even though Miguel insists that Miles isn't supposed to be Spider-Man, that was all just a mistake, Miles still like, even though he learns this, he's still on the movie is still actively against this mindset that no, Miles himself should be Spider-Man. The fact that he is like going against this canon rule and trying to continue saving people despite the universe telling him he has to let people die, where all the other Spider-Men are sort of like abscond are like accepting of this. Miles, his flat out rejection of this, his willingness to admit this is wrong, shows why he is truly meant to be Spider-Man. Even if the universe doesn't want to be Spider-Man, he is Spider-Man because he's the one who is following all these ideals, whereas all the other ones are failing to uphold it.
And I think the main reason why the different Spider-Man, even like Peter B. Spider or Gwen or Spider Gwen, or like even Penny, who makes a brief cameo in this film with an updated design, more reminiscent, that is more accurate to her design in the comics, which I really love. It looks so much better now than her original design in the film. Not that her design in the original film was bad, but I think this updated design they give Penny for like her brief moment in the film looks so much better. But like, I believe the reason why all these Spider-Man are like sort of adhering to this rule, because like with Miguel, the reason why he's adhering to this rule is because he blames himself for destroying that other alternate reality, and one could argue that it was his fault because he basically replaced another version of himself, which he really shouldn't have done. Like, it's different from like letting somebody die and stay like replacing an alternate version of yourself so you can live this more ideal life is a lot different than like choosing to save somebody when the world doesn't want you to save them. But yeah, sorry, back to the other point, but basically I think the main reason why all these other Spider-Man besides Miguel are willing to follow this rule beyond just a the greater good mentality is sort of this idea that they are on some level, like I think this is most evident when when Miles brings up Uncle Ben and Peter B says that most of us wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for Uncle Ben. The idea that if Uncle Ben hadn't died, they wanted to become Spider-Man is basically like them trying to cope with their tragedy, the tragic death of their loved ones, by trying to come up with some sort of justification for it. The idea that if it didn't happen, these other bad things would have happened. That they have to be willing to accept that the only way that they can cope with the tragic deaths of either Uncle Ben or Captain Stacy or all these other loved ones is the idea that they cope with it by basically like rationalizing their deaths and coming up with some sort of like like again with Uncle Ben, the idea that like he had to die in order for them to become Spider-Man. This idea that like their deaths happened for a reason, and that reason was so that better things could come of it. But that itself is just like it is a flawed coping mechanism because again, that's not what being Spider-Man is about. Being about Spider-Man is doing everything you can to help somebody. It's about not just standing by and letting somebody die when you have the power to help them. And eventually, because these characters are like trying so desperately to cope and rationalize the deaths of their loved ones, they are willing to break their ideals and enforce the canon. Which again, though, is wrong because it goes against everything Spider-Man stands for, and that's why Miles is the hero of the story, and that's what this film is ultimately about. It's basically like the first film was basically using Miles to tell a story about how anyone could wear the mask, anyone could be Spider-Man, and this is the more basically saying that like basically saying a big F you to all the people who saying Miles isn't Spider-Man, going, no, he is not just Spider-Man. He is the Spider-Man. He is the Spider-Man that will uphold the true ideals that make Spider-Man even when all the others fail to. And I really love that. I think that's such a brilliant idea. Not only does it create a wonderful moral dilemma between Miles and Miguel that results in like not just a really deep and dramatic conflict, but one with so much thematic weight and emotional strength. And I also really love the reveal that basically Peter B. Parker and Gwen already knew that Miguel had told them about like the whole like Miles wasn't supposed to be Spider-Man stuff, that he's an irregularity. And like I love that too because not only does it cause further drama and friction between them, but it also like it makes Miles feel more alone and disconnected from the Spider-Man. Because by the end of the first movie, he felt like he didn't feel alone because he met these other versions of Spider-Man. But in this movie, the fact that he feels disconnected because on some level they don't truly see him as Spider-Man because he is this irregularity. And whereas Miguel, I definitely feel like is viewing that in part because he's, again, I said before and I'll say again, he's projecting his own self-loathing onto Miles. But like with the other Spider people, this does come across to Miles like they don't truly accept him, which isn't the case. Like the reason why they kept the secret, why they didn't tell him, why they avoided him, is because they wanted to keep him safe, because they didn't want to hurt him, because they thought this would hurt him. But by doing this, they have only caused him more pain because now he feels more alienated from them than ever, which is just such good drama. All the stuff they do with Miles, all the stuff they do with Miguel, with Peter B. Parker, with Gwen, and the other Spider-Man, it's also good stuff. But yeah, now that I talked about like the main thing I really want to talk about, I'm going to talk about the rest of the movie and probably try to do it in a bit more of a chronological order. But I'll probably like skip around and stuff that I think is like more interesting or stuff that I can better talk about. So at the beginning of the film, we get a prologue, basically about Spider Gwen, and specifically starts giving doing her origin, a retelling of her origin, but in more depth. Specifically, it focuses a lot on her relationship with Peter and how like basically her family were also like friends with Peter's family. Like he and Aunt May would frequently visit to cook dinner with them most of the times. It was very much a like they weren't just like friends. They were like there was very much a familial bond between them. And maybe I'm just looking too this much. I definitely got the feeling that there was a slight romantic bond between them, or at the very least, Peter might have had a crush on Gwen. And one of the main reasons why I think there might have been slight romantic hints is because there's a part where where there's a prom and Gwen is looking for Peter at the prom. So it does make me wonder if like maybe they were like going together, like I don't know, maybe it was just two friends hanging out together. Well, I don't think it was prom specifically, it was more like homecoming. Yeah, it was definitely homecoming because prom's like at the end of high school. But yeah, but like she was looking for him at the dance, being either he was her date or it was maybe just a case of like friends going, together on prom. But I do wonder if it's possible that there might have, because like I definitely get the impression that Peter had a slight crush on Gwen, because like he was not only taking pictures of Spider Gwen, and it's revealed at the end that he always knew she was Spider Gwen, or like Spider, right? She's called Spider Woman in the story. I don't know why it's because the fan base calls her Spider Gwen, and that's what she was sort of referred, at least marketing wise, when the character was first invented in the comics. But like in the actual story, she's called Spider Woman. So, but yeah, in the flashback, basically, Peter was taking pictures of Spider Woman,
And then after she beats him as the Lizard, in which he unfortunately dies due to being crushed during the attack, he reveals that he always knew Gwen was Spider-Woman and that he wanted to be special like her. And the fact that he was sort of taking the picture of her, that sort of like relationship that feels somewhat intimate. I definitely get the impression that like her universe's version of Peter had a crush on her, which would make sense given the context of the comics. And I also get the impression that maybe Gwen might have held feelings for Peter, specifically because like Gwen specifically like parallels her relationship to Miles with her relationship to Peter, and like it is very blatantly in the text that like Gwen and Miles are meant to be like sort of romantically involved, or like they have romantic feelings for each other. So I kind of don't get I get the impression that like the story is supposed to be implying that there were slight romantic feelings between um Gwen yeah, I should just call her Gwen because there's not another Gwen in the story. But yeah, I definitely get the impression that there was like romantic feelings between Gwen and her version of Peter. And I get that not just because of the parallels Gwen herself draws between her relationship with Miles and her relationship with Peter, but also because Gwen has a line that like in every universe, things very Gwen and Spider-Man fall for each other, but things very rarely go well together. And I get the feeling that like Gwen, when she says that, she is also some way reflecting on her relationship with her universe's version of Peter, because that ended up ending with Peter unfortunately dying as a result of turning into a lizard. And another thing I sort of found interesting during this sort of flashback sequence is that I believe Peter's bully was Ned instead of Flash. I know this because I specifically remember Gwen referring to him as Ned, even though his design does look a little bit more like Flash. But then again, I think Ned was actually a blonde in the comics too, so that would make sense. But yeah, kind of interesting that they made Ned the bully instead of Flash. Then again, maybe she didn't say Ned and I just misheard, but I could have sworn she said Ned. But anyway, um, but yeah, we basically get Gwen's backstory, how after Peter died as the Lizard, Spider Woman was eventually blamed for the death, and her father made it a personal mission to capture Spider Woman now because again, like Peter was a not just his daughter's best friend, but also like he was a close family friend. Like he and the Parkers were they were like they were basically family. So this is just as much personal to him as it is for Gwen, and that's sort of the tragedy of it all. And I know this is like from the original Spider-Gwen comics, but again, I think this is really good drama, and I feel like it works specifically in the story because part of Gwen's arc, a large focus of it, is her relationship with her father. So I like it that they set up the emotional stakes of this conflict between her and her father, and why Gwen is so afraid of telling her dad who she is, but also of like you also sort of get the reason why her father is so hell bent on catching Spider-Man because this is personal to him, even though he doesn't understand the situation, even though he's under the wrong assumption. Like this is still very much personal, which I like. Now then, now the story eventually goes on, and we eventually see like Gwen going on an adventure in her world, as well as also seeing about her angst and struggle, how she's like how because she can't tell anyone about her secret identity, she's forced to repress all her anger and frustration, and it's just sort of bubbling into her personal life and making it harder for her to connect to people, and that she's still like alienating herself from others because she's afraid she's gonna have the same thing happen to what happened with Peter is gonna happen again, where someone close to her dies, which again, good stuff. And yeah, but basically, this prologue goes on, we see more of it, and then we end up seeing where she tries what appears to be a normal event of her finding her version of the lizard, only to find out that it is an alternate version of the lizard that got plucked here thanks to the wormholes as a result of the Collider incident from the previous movie. Now I'm gonna stop with the story summary because I don't like doing that. But I just want to talk about the visuals of Gwen's world in this prologue second. It is so good. They basically like it is. They basically what they did is they like it sort of has a similar art style to like Miles' world, but in Gwen's world the colors are a lot more saturated. There's like these thick neon watercolor colors over everything. The backgrounds are a lot more or less detailed. They're more like large brushstrokes of different colors, and like the colors are constantly changing over each scene to convey the mood of the characters and the feeling so good. And there are even points of it in which the backgrounds become nothing more but like these beautiful watercolor paintings that depict the characters' emotions and all their rawness. And it's so good. And I believe that they were like I haven't read the Spider-Gwen comics, but from what I've heard, this is what the art style of them looks like, and that they're essentially like sort of taking the art style of the Spider-Gwen comics, translating the movie. And if that's true, they did a really good job. But yeah, specifically, I think what I really love is how these colors sort of change to reflect the character's emotion. How like no frame ends up having the same colors as another one. Like we can have one quick scene where the backgrounds are like a neon blue, and it cuts, and the backgrounds are like these like neon red, or more like pink. It's really good. But one sequence I really love is this part where like Gwen goes back home after she quits her band out of frustration because Gwen was like she was basically the movie opens with her as she's describing her backstory and stuff. She's like playing the drums, and then you see the drums like get more aggressive and angrier and keep going as in the conveyance of like Gwen is getting caught up in her anger and her frustration. And I really like this part of the line where she says she became a drummer because she could take her anger out and hit them out and use her sticks to channel them out. And that is interesting. And I do like this contrast how this causes conflict with the band because it's very clear that Gwen is focusing more on herself than the actual band. And like the band people themselves aren't really portrayed as like terrible people. Like they do seem to want to like help Gwen, but it's very clear that Gwen is keeping herself closed off and is connecting to them. But it's also very clear that the band members, well, they do seem to care on some level. They don't care quite enough in order to like push past Gwen's barriers to actually try to help her, which is why this ultimately ends with Gwen quitting the band in frustration. Not to say that her bandmates were mean or anything, but it's clear that they were not quite the. It's probably clear that even if Gwen wasn't completely angry, this relationship would eventually fall out just due to like the not 100% sort of investment with each other. If that makes any sense. Sometimes when I say things, they sound kind of rambly, and I try my best to make sense to them. But it's with making videos unscripted, it's difficult to always put every thought to words. But yeah, after she storms off her band and returns home, there's a scene where she's having an argument with her dad, and then this dad eventually has this line of "You too, punk rock dog your dad," and then she just immediately hugs him, and I love how the background changed because during this part in the scene, this argument between her father, the backgrounds are like these cold colors, like blues and greens and like very cold colors to sort of get across sort of like the angst and frustrated emotions. And then when she hugs her dad, immediately the background shifts to these warmer yellows and like smooth orange. Like it's literally like she hugs her dad, and then the colors like then his dad changes to the color. Actually, I think his color was he was always colored in a specific like yellowish orange. And then when she hugs his dad, the yellowish orange sort of spreads out from the hug to the rest of the world. And again, dude, I really love how the Gwen's world, how they put so much emphasis on the colors and using these colors to experience the emotions. And I love how it changes from these cold colors to warm colors when she hugs his dad and sort of embraces him. Again, it's very sweet, very touching. But of course, it ends up getting interrupted when the police call, and that leads to him having to leave to go to police work to take down the Vulture character, and then Gwen ends up having to fight the Vulture character. But yeah, back to the actual fight with the Vulture. So it's basically like a Leonardo. Yeah, Leonardo da Vinci style like drawing. Like he's from this basically like he's from this world that's basically supposed to set place in like the Leonardo da Vinci time area period. I don't remember the exact time, but yeah, sort of like that. And it's basically a world where everything looks like Leonardo's devices and inventions. So he's animated in this way too, and it's the way they animate this alternate Vulture is so beautiful. He almost kind of looks like he's made he hang on, saying right. He looks straight up like he's made out of like paper. Like he's like they don't just portray him in a different art style. They make him look like he's made out of a literal different property of material, and it's so cool. Yeah, and I really love the way they animate and also the way he fights. But one thing that I do find is a bit interesting is that this alternate Vulture, his weapons, he fires like they look a lot like Green Goblin weapons. Like they're like there's the bombs and the spinning blades and stuff and all these projectile stuff. So it makes me wonder if perhaps like they took some ideas, like maybe originally there was going to be like a goblin type alternate goblin in this fight, but then they changed their mind to the Vulture and they took some of those like weapons from the goblin and gave them to Vulture, which is interesting. But yeah, because they're fighting this alternate version of because there's of course this alternate version of the Vulture in there. This is how like Miguel Spider-Man 29 gets introduced, and as he's here trying to wrangle up the Vulture so that they can return him to his world. And then eventually he calls Jessica Drew Spider-Woman, who also comes up to help, and they work together with Spider-Gwen to take down this vulture. And throughout it, Jessica Drew, like, she's of course interested in Gwen, definitely because Gwen is in our Spider-Woman, but because she can also like see her potential. And I really love this part where like Gwen is focusing so that she can, like, during the fight with the Vulture, how they illustrate how, like, in her head she's thinking of her drumming in order to help her focus. And it's really cool. So I really like that, sort of taking her like hobbies and interests and like incorporating it in a way to help her like fight. It's really cool. But yeah, eventually, the two do work together to take down the Vulture, but because of the resulting fight, Gwen gets injured, and she ends up being faced down by her father, in which she is forced to finally unmask herself to him. And this causes like a huge breakdown between them. Huge frustration. She unmasks herself and she tries to appeal to him, trying to calm down. But he's, of course, he's having trouble processing this. He feels on some level betrayed too because she's been lying to him this whole time. But you also kind of get it. And then he more or less kind of tries to arrest her, or maybe he doesn't. I think, like, I get the feeling that less like he was actually going to arrest Gwen, but more like he was just reciting his police tactics and the police playbook and stuff. You know, the lines you're supposed to recite when you arrest somebody, out of like a coping mechanism, because he wasn't quite sure how to handle it and deal with his emotions. And then Miguel ends up, like, I think he imprisons her dad. Like, he puts her in a tramp in order to stop the commotion. And like, I do kind of like how this sort of visualizes that Miguel himself is like not a very good people person. At least this version of Miguel in the story, because like it's very clear that, well, I definitely think the movie does a good job of distilling the specific elements of Miguel's character that makes it different from other Spider-Man. They do definitely change his character in ways to make him like fit the narrative and the role he has to play in the story, which I think is fine. Like, because he doesn't, it's not like it's a betrayal of the character, it is a new version of him, but it's a new version of him that is not only extremely compelling and fun to watch, but is also one that works for the narrative very well. But yeah, in the narrative, he is more of an authoritative figure who isn't really the best with people and is a lot more aggressive and self-serious. But yeah, eventually, like, basically Miguel the traps Gwen's dad for a bit so he doesn't do anything. And then Jessica Drew convinces Spider-Man 29 to let them recruit Gwen into their group because they basically know that Gwen's life has been like screwed over by this fight, and that like Gwen clearly doesn't know if she'll be safe in this reality, in her own reality anymore, because she's worried that her own dad is going to try to arrest her. So so he basically like so basically because of that he allows Spider Gwen to join the group so that they can basically like give her a temporary home in the meantime because she can't go back to her own home. And I do think this is very interesting because like it's very clear that part of the reason why Miguel ends up going through with this is because he definitely feels guilty for this. Because if they had handled the fight better, or he probably feels in mind that if he took down the Vulture himself, this mess wouldn't have happened. Which I think is a very good way this film indicates very early on that Miguel has this huge self-loathing guilt complex that very much is very much plays a role into all of his actions throughout the film. Again, I point this out specifically how this guilt and this self-loathing causes Miguel to project all of his anger and insecurities onto Miles, and how it's basically like why he's so dead set on protecting the canon because he's so consumed by his own guilt for his own mistakes. But yeah, also like Jessica Drew, like again, she clearly likes Spider Gwen probably because like I probably said this for her because she's another Spider Woman, and she also clearly sees her potential, and so she ends up taking her Gwen under her wing too as her mentor, which I like. I also think it's kind of a good idea to give Gwen a mentor figure in this film because like this movie is just as much Gwen's story as it is Miles' story, so I think giving Gwen a mentor figure is good, especially because in the last movie Miles had like Peter B. Parker as a mentor figure. So now, Gwen, because she's getting more focused in the story and her more developed arc, she also gets a mentor figure, which again I think is really good stuff. But yeah, after that's the basically end of the Gwen prologue, and again I think this is really good idea for the film to give to dedicate such a large part of the beginning of the film to Gwen because this movie is just as much Gwen's story as it is Miles' story, and her arc. I'd argue that Gwen has the most complete arc in this film because while Miles' arc does come to a conclusion, it does feel a little bit unfinished because this movie is a part one. It ends on a cliffhanger, so I feel like Miles' character arc isn't going to conclude until the next movie, whereas Gwen very much by the end of this film has a conclusion to her character arc. So yeah, I'm glad this film opened with a prologue on Gwen Stacy to basically indicate that this is just as much her film as it is Miles. But yeah, once that's done, we then get a brief like recap of the previous films as well as Miles bring us to speed of what happened in the intervening year between this movie and the last film. And there's this really joke I love where like Miles like endorses baby powder, and then it turns out the baby powder is like it does. They don't specify what's wrong with the baby powder, but it does something really bad. So he ends up having to make a full on apology video about it. And I really love how in this, like where he's talking about previous events, there's the recap video becomes the apology video. I mean, becomes a recurring joke where Miles keeps having to make these different apology videos for disasters he makes. It's just I don't know. It's so funny. Again, the idea of a superhero basically making an apology video, it's so funny. And the fact that Miles makes this dumb teenager, I feel like makes it all the more funnier. Because, of course, the dumb teenager would think, yeah, I gotta make an apology video for this. Like, this isn't something you would see, like, Captain America doing, but you could definitely see, like, yeah, Miles would do that. Miles would do this funny. They also mentioned that Aunt May moved to Florida in the intervening years. Which is like a good choice because, like, again, though, it's not only is it a way to sort of get Aunt May out of the movie, but I think it's another way of showing like making Miles seem a bit more independent because like now he is like working on his own and he has less of a support system than he kind of did in the film. Not saying that like Aunt May was like his like Alfred or anything in the first movie, but she was definitely offering Miles some of those support since she was the one who helped him come up with his costume. So yeah, but like taking her out is a good way not only to explain why she isn't doing anything in the film or why she isn't part of events, but also as a way to like make Miles more on his own because this movie Miles' very much arc is about Miles trying to come into his own as a person and how it sort of clashes with authority figures around him, from both his parents to the different Spider-Men. Now then, after they finish with the recap and the catch-up, we get to see a fight between Miles in the Spot, while Miles' parents are waiting for him to have a discussion with a guidance counselor to figure out his plans for college. And I really like this right off the bat because again, it's doing that sort of classic Spider-Man trope of the Spider-Man being busy fighting crime while his personal life is going on and the people in his personal life waiting for him and feeling like he is failing to commit to them and how that sort of like obsesses him. But yeah, I really like the Spot's portrayal in this movie and especially like his design. I love it when we first see the Spot. He looks very dopey and he's very much portrayed as a comedic antagonist. Specifically what I mean is like when we open it, he's trying to like rob from an ATM but but he doesn't quite know how to master his powers. And I do kind of like how his spots are specifically things he takes off and like uses them wise in the film. But I also really like how like I don't think they flat out state this, but like his spots are meant to be like dark matter spots, which I think is a cool detail. Yeah, I really love how like sort of sloppy and dopey he looks at the beginning. Like his general design is less like a pure silhouette, and it's more like sort of a frumpy sort of middleweight, overweight man. Like he's a bit short. He has poor posture. You can see a bit of a gut. He's a bit slumpy, and I really like that. I also really like how messy the different specimen look. Again, to convey that sort of like dark that they're made out of dark matter. But I also really love how like his design, how they sort of he isn't a complete silhouette, they do lead into silhouette items because you can see like sort of the sketches marks of different drawings. Like when you do a drawing of a silhouette and you draw like the circles and lines, you can see those on his body. So it sort of gives the idea that like when he became the Spot, it wasn't just his face was removed, his like face and all physical. It wasn't like he was just reduced to a silhouette. It's specifically like he was like stripped down as a drawing, like parts of him were erased. And again, though, they basically take this idea of him becoming this sort of like pure abstract silhouette figure and sort of making it literal by sort of like stripping down his features as a drawing. Again, really cool stuff. But yeah, I do love the jokes. How like Miles doesn't take him seriously at first, whereas the Spot keeps trying to insist he's a serious threat, claiming that he and Miles are intrinsically connected, and then later, as it goes on, revealing that he was the one who revealing that the spider that bit Miles from the first movie was the spider he brought from another dimension, and that when Miles destroyed the Collider, caused an accident that transformed him to a Spot. But also, they mentioned that he was the guy Miles threw a bagel at the first movie. And just side note about the bagel thing, but I was actually spoiled on this by the internet. Specifically because I saw these like jokes, people going like, it's funny that both like Across the Spider Verse and everywhere, everything all at once, have the world end because of a bagel. So I thought, okay, then a bagel must be connected to Spot. Maybe he like finally figures out how to use his powers because he wants to get a bagel or something, or maybe he's like referred to a bagel in the film. Like maybe they make a sort of like bagel joke because he's got all those holes in him. But then later I saw like a thumbnail for a video that was like the importance of the bagel, and it was like pointing at the bagel and the guy getting hated about it. And then I put two together, and it was like, oh, the Spot is the guy that mouthed the bagel at. And I was disappointed to find that out before I saw the movie. P.S. I didn't watch the video, this thumbnail. I just saw the thumbnail, and I was like, oh, I was able to put like two and two together. So I was disappointed I find out this out before I saw the film, but like still seeing in the film was very good. Also, when I first like was spoiled in this, I thought that like him getting hit the bagel was like directly responsible for him becoming Spot. Like I thought it was gonna be real that when Miles hit the bagel and it cost him the trip from falling into some sort of experiment that like transformed him into Spot or something. And of course, that's not actually what happened in the film. He's just really bitter and upset at Miles for like throwing a bagel at him, which is like fairly goofy and silly. But like I do like that sort of the idea that like the Spot is this guy who like desperately wants to be seen as more important than he is, and is also has he's also slightly a bit delusional because again, while he does, I do think he does make a point about him and Miles being intrinsically connected, and on some level you do sympathize him the idea of wanting to be treated seriously and be treated as a real threat. There's specifically this line where he's like, I turned you into a hero, you turned me into a freak. And like you sort of get the Spot's anger, but it's also like it's very clear that this guy sees himself as more important than he really is. And you also kind of get the feeling that he's very much blaming others for mistakes or his own, and he's also just a little bit delusional. And I think the way they best sort of show his like delusionalness is like when he first explains backstory, we get this flashback of him, and in the flashback he looks like this fairly attractive guy, but then later in the film we see a picture of him before he became the Spot, and he's this much more slubby, overweight, very hairy dude. So it makes it very clear that in his flashback he sees himself as like more great as he sees himself as a better, more attractive person than he actually was. And there are other elements of throughout the flashback hinting his delusion. Like there's this part in which he's surrounded by all the other scientists from Alchemist Labs and being laughed at and mocked for his like new Spot appearance. And you definitely get the feeling that like this probably isn't what really happened. This is just what like he's sort of imagining it. Because if he's able to like alter his own appearance in his flashbacks and see himself as far more attractive and idealistic than he actually was, I think that further highlights the idea that like again he's a bit delusional and he sees himself as someone more important than he actually was. And I also like the fact that like him like looking more attractive in his flashbacks than he actually looked is sort of hinted at in his dialogue when he's introduced, because he makes a comment at the beginning of the film that I used to be handsome for like scientist standards. So again, this idea that like he sees himself as a bigger shot than he really is. But yeah, eventually the fight. I do like this part where it seems like the fight ends and Miles ties him up and he tells Gandhi to call the police about it. And Gandhi's like, "No, I'm not gonna be your guy in the chair, dude. I'm not gonna get involved with this too much." And I like that joke. It's like definitely a callback to like Ned in the MCU Spider-Man films where he refers to himself as the guy in the chair. But yeah, in general, it's like fairly fun stuff. But yeah, eventually like Spot breaks out and that causes Miles to leave during his his like his meeting with his parents and the guidance counselor. And to talk a bit more about that sort of meeting, I do like this conflict between Miles and his parents, where Miles wants to go to a college out of state, specifically, I think he specifically wants to go to one in New Jersey, and his parents are upset about this because they don't want him to go too far away. They still want him to stay near them. And Miles is adamant, saying the fact that like he wants to branch out, he wants to go to other places and do amazing things, because he specifically mentions that he wants to go to this other college because they're doing experiments for travel to other dimensions. It's clear that he wants to do that in part because he wants to meet the other Spider-Man, of course, but it's also but it's like it's very clear that in his conversation when he's talking about how he wants to go out and meet more people, he wants to do amazing things out there, and he doesn't want to stay in the same area. This is supposed to be like him projecting his feelings of like wanting to go to other universes and meet the other Spider-Man. Again, be part of something he views as greater. And I really do love the speech he sort of gives to his parents, where he's like very much empathetic of them, but also trying to like make them understand what he wants, and it make them sort of understand why I do this. And I love how it ends with like the guidance counselors being like, "Yeah, that's your story. That's how you help get into another college." And of course, there's plenty of good jokes in this sort of like scene. Like there's this one where like Miles got like a B in Spanish, and his mom's upset about that, because like they speak
because like she is Spanish and they like speak Spanish like at home and normally, so she's of course disappointed that he would get such a low grade in something he should like be successful at. And I also love how he's like, his dad is like, "Do you want to kill your mother?" No, he's like, "Are you trying to kill your mother?" Because he's also upset at Miles for that. General, the scene is like very well made. It's very animated. I love the body language and the dynamic between Miles and his parents. It all feels very natural and very well done. And I also like the part where the scene eventually like Miles has to leave and then his dad has to leave too because he's a cop and so he has to take care of superheroes and stuff because the spot is free. And I like this idea where like the scene then focuses on the mother and the guy counselor is like, Miles is clearly lying to you. You know that you probably need to do something about this. And the mom again, like this film definitely gives Miles's mother much more attention than the first movie, where it was a lot more focused on Miles's relationship with his dad and uncle. But yeah, this scene where we then focus on Miles's mom is definitely getting a sense that this film is going to incorporate her a lot more than the previous film, which I like. I like how like again in the first movie we gave a lot of time to Jeff. Now it's time to focus on Miles' mom in this film, which is again I think is a really good thing to do in like sequels where like you've already spent a lot of time focusing on these other characters in the previous film. Time to like focus on these other characters that didn't create quite as much in the previous entry. Like I think that's very smart. But yeah, eventually, again, Miles fights Spot again. His dad is also there, and of course, I already explained how like that's where we get the scene where the Spot explains his origin to Miles and how like they're connected, and like we see him rage out of it before he manages to screw up with his powers and basically kick himself in the nard and then knock himself into one of his own spots. And like Miles, there's this instance where like Miles sort of just assumes, okay, Promise is care of himself, time to go, which I definitely is a bit of Miles being slightly irresponsible because like again he does kind of let the Spot go, which just causes Spot to be a bigger problem later, which I do fairly like Spider-Man sort of making mistakes in that end up in stuff like that coming to bite them in the butts. I think it's good stuff. But I also really like the scene between Miles as Spider-Man and his dad, where like he's trying to give his father advice on the situation, and it's not only funny because it's like Miles is sort of awkward in the scene, like he's trying to make his voice deeper, and he's not always the best at giving advice. And of course, there's jokes about him like clearly being involved and biased to this, but Jeff not realizing it. But yeah, it's very much Miles trying to tell his dad that he like needs to get off his kid's butt, and that like if they keep pressuring himself, it's gonna hurt him. But Jeff is also trying to explain like he doesn't quite know what to do as a dad. That it's difficult watching your kids grow up and start to drift apart from you, and you always worry that you're not like doing enough to be a good dad. And I feel like Miles, on some level, he gets it, but he also doesn't because he's a kid and stuff, and it's difficult to relate to parents. But I do like the scene. I also like the part where Miles, as Spider-Man, like tries to say, "Maybe you should get off the cruiser." He kind of stops. Like he's trying to like. I was not expecting them to actually fit the word "ass" in this film, which is like funny. But they also cut off midway. But like you can clearly tell what he's saying. So like again, like a clever way to sort of bring in a curse, and like again, it makes the dialogue feel a bit more natural. Like because that's something a kid would say, say to describe sort of the relationship with parents. But yeah, after that, we of course get the scene where like Spock goes into a bunch of different universes, and I love how like one of the first universes you go to is like a Lego universe, and then after that we get a scene of like Lego Spider-Man informing Miguel about this situation, and I just love it that they give such a big cameo to like a later Lego Spider-Man because the 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 writers of this film, shoot, I gotta look up their names because I forget. Chris Miller and Phil Lord. That was their names. Yeah, they're like basically the people who have not only like do most of the writing, but basically like I don't. They don't. They're not like directing. I don't. Maybe they did direct the first Spider Verse movie, but I forget. But basically, they're the guys in charge of it. They're the guys who are like heads of the stories and like the people heading up these films. And like they also made the Lego movie, so I really like how like Lego Spider-Man got a big cameo in this film and like focus. But yeah, we get to see these different scenes of like Spot entering universe and basically figuring out his powers give him the ability to travel the multiverse. And then this one scene where he ends up going to a live action world. And at first I was confused because I didn't know what this world was. I thought it was like a reference to something I didn't know about. But then I found, oh no, wait, this is like from the Venom movies. And I'm like, oh, that's pretty neat. But I do really love this scene, not just because we get to see like Spot's anime character interacting with a live action world, and it looks very interesting. But I also love how like the lady he's talking to is just like not at all perturbed by this. She treats it all like normal and is relatively like annoyed with Spot. And like if I recall correctly, that's because she's like a character from the Venom films that ends up seeing weird stuff in those movies. So like yeah, that would explain her like reaction. And it's like it's a very funny gag. But yeah, I do like this part where like the Spot is sort of like realizing his powers and like sort of trying to figure out his potential, because it draws a parallels between him and Miles in the first film, where Miles was sort of like looked down on. He wasn't like, people failed to see his true potential, and they sort of like, but like this, like of course Peter B. Parker and Gwen and the other Spider-Man tried their best to like believe in Miles, but there was definitely this part where like a part of them didn't. And of course there was Miles' frustration with his father, where he felt like his father didn't quite approve of what he wanted. And like, he wanted his dad to like, he wanted him to like respect him and his art more, rather than feeling like his dad's trying to make him somebody he isn't. And like, but yeah, Miles' arc and very much part of the movie is sort of like him not only proving himself to him, is him proving himself to others and himself, and reaching his true potential that he wants to assess. And like Spot, again, he's like, he has a similar arc in this, and where he wants to prove that he's not just an average villain of the week, that he's more important, that he is more special than people treat him as. And of course he's able to figure out that potential. But with Spot, it's like a villainous version of Miles' arc in the first film, which again I think is really clever. I think it's a really smart idea for like a sequel to have the main villain enter a similar arc to protagonist from the previous entry, but make it sort of a dark, fucked up villain version of it. Like again, really good stuff. But yeah, after that, we end up seeing a party for Jeff, who has been promoted to captain of the police force. And while that's happening, Miles is trying to make it to the party, but also being distracted by Spider-Man stuff, as well as trying to deliver the cakes for his dad's party. And I really like this part where Jeff sort of gives a speech about like the importance of his family and his son, and how they're the ones that motivate him to do what he wants and to help. They're the reason he's able to do what he does. But of course, though, he's a bit disappointed because Miles isn't here when he's giving the speech, and there's definitely this element of like Jeff like wanting to explain this to Miles, but like because of Miles being distracted by Spider-Man, it's causing a disconnect between them, which is preventing Jeff from being able to explain all this to Miles, even though he so desperately wants to open up. But Miles just isn't there because he's being distracted by being Spider-Man. But of course, Jeff doesn't know this, so Jeff feels just like Miles is blowing him off and is like not treating him as like as well as Jeff has been trying to treat Miles, which again is good drama. And of course, this results in a blowout between Miles and his parents, because not only does Miles arrive late, but the cakes are ruined, and they're of course upset at him because Miles is clearly keeping things from him, but he won't explain it, and he can't tell them because Miles is like deathly afraid of telling his parents that he's Spider-Man, because he's worried it could ruin his relationships with them, which is the dilemma almost every superhero goes through. But yeah, I do really love this scene where they have this break. There's this gag where like the DJ realizes that Miles and parents are fighting, so he's trying to turn up the music so the rest of the guests don't notice it. But it ends up failing. Like eventually, the music isn't able to drown them out anymore. And we cut to DJ, and he's just freaking out. He's like, "Ah, oh, damn it!" He's like, he tried to help, but he couldn't. And again, I really like that. And it's like it's clear that like this, and like the rest of the Miguel's family sort of sees this blowout, and it makes everything just the more awkward. And Miles, of course, grounded, and he ends up storming off to his room in frustration because he wants to tell his parents, he wants to explain what's going on, but he can't because he's too afraid of what will happen if he does. Which again, classic teenage superhero drama, and I really love it. It's also just again the way this film sort of like handles these like normal talking scenes between characters like very well. You can feel the drama and the tension so well, just not only by the way everything is animated, but also by the framing, the voice acting, and the dialogue. Just all so good. But later on, after that, we get like a scene of Gwen suddenly showing up in Miles' life again, and it's fairly cute just seeing them hang out, talk to each other, getting to see Miles sort of vent about his problems. But I especially really love this scene where like Miles's parents meet Gwen, and it's just like I don't know, so interesting seeing these characters' interactions. They never really like interacted in the first movie. But also kind of like how his parents are like on some level like being a bit not quite judgmental, but they're very much like how sometimes parents when they meet the significant other of their kid, they're like kind of harsh and like trying to speak spoke out, not like sort of like scan the person to see what they're like, just see if they're like a good fit for their kid. So you kind of get that with Miguel's parents. It's very interesting sort of seeing how they interact with Gwen, and just in general, it's like I don't know. I've already said before, but like the dialogue and the way everything is animated and framed during these like these scenes of like characters sort of interacting with their family members and like sort of normal conversations, they're all like very well. Like the family drama in this film was executed just as well as it was in the first film, if not better, I'd say. But yeah, eventually Miles finds out that like Gwen was looking for the spot, and they realize that the spot has not only figured out that he needs to get more holes, but he has found a way to recreate his holes and is going to another universe to find another collider to become even more powerful. So yeah, eventually, and I really like this scene where like Gwen is like she's talking to um a Spider Woman. The shoot, I forget her first name. How can I forget it? I just said it earlier in the podcast. Jessica Drew. Jessica Drew. That's it. She talks to Jessica Drew. Basically, like she was going out for letting Spot go because she got distracted by Miles, and now Gwen has to try to figure out what she needs to do. But also Jessica Drew makes Gwen promise not to go by Miles again for reasons that we find out later in the film. And like again, I really love this because like Miles is like watching Gwen in his invisibility mode the whole time because he's trying to go after her because his mom instructed Miles to go after Gwen, which I thought was like really sweet. But yeah, well, not instructed, more like she encouraged him to go after Gwen because she could recognize how much Gwen meant to Miles. But um, yeah, as Miles is like watching Gwen doing this whole thing, seeing her get chewed out, seeing her freak out, and like he's like in invisibility mode, so like it adds weight to the Spencer drama. You can also tell that Miles feels guilty not just for distracting Gwen, but because he blames himself for because if he had taken care of Spot earlier, this wouldn't have happened. But yeah, and but yeah, I really love this part where she's like, where Gwen basically says goodbye, Miles, and she doesn't know Miles is there because of the invisibility mode. And it's really cool because like the way it's sort of directed makes it look like they're like the way it's framed because you can see Miles even when invisibility mode. And Miles is like so close to Gwen, like within kissing distance of her, so it makes the whole thing feel more dramatic. And it makes the moment where Miles chooses to hop through Gwen's portal in order to help feel all that more impactful. But yeah, after that we end up getting Miles jumps through the portals and we end up in Indian Spider-Man's world, who is named Vitor Papa. I'm probably mispronouncing that. Really sorry, but yeah, he gets his design in the Incredible Spider-Man in this film is so good and such a massive glow up from his original design in the comics. Like it's so much more detailed because like in the comics it was slightly a bit more basic version of Spider-Man's costume. But here it's like again it's got so much more personality, so much more flair to it, and I really love how he's got his hair sticking out. And I just gotta say his hair is so good looking in this film. But yeah, I really like sorry, I'm just gonna call him Spider-Man India because I can't pronounce his real name. I'm sorry. I'm still trying to work out pronouncing names that aren't English. I'm sorry about that. But yeah, I really sort of like how they portray him as this more happy-go-lucky version of Spider-Man, who's like he hasn't been through the same tragedies the other Spider-Man have been to, so he sees it. He tends to enjoy being Spider-Man more and sees it as something easier, which I think is very interesting. Sort of getting to see a Spider-Man that hasn't already had his life ruined by tragedies. So getting to see that sort of carefree look of being a superhero, I think is really fun. And again, he's got so much charisma. He bounces off really well. I really love how they do these webs where he's like where he doesn't just like swing webs. He's got like these specific like gauntlets around his arms that he swings around. Kind of looks like a yo-yo, but not quite, and uses that to flip around. It's really cool. But yeah, they tried to take down Spot, but they end up getting a tough niddle, and that's when Bam, one of the best characters in this whole film, shows up. Spider Punk, aka Hobie Brown, and gosh, is he so cool! They animate him in a specific way where his colors are always changing, where he's got like search. He looks like a punk. He looks like a punk graffiti drawing, and that's the way he's animated. Different parts of his body are animated at different frames. He looks so crazy. I also love how his costume looks. It looks even more punkish than the original comics. I particularly love how his like mohawk spikes on top of his helmet. They're like massive because in the comics they're a lot smaller, but in the movie they're like these huge things that gets in this huge mohawk and it looks so cool. And at first I was a bit worried how they portray Spider-Punk in this film because a lot of like in the articles coming out of this movie framed it like Hobie was going to be like there's going to be like a love triangle between Miles, Gwen, and Hobie, but that's not really the case. Well, Miles does becomes jealous of Hobie and sees him when he first hears about Hobie, views him as a romantic rival. It's very clear that's more like in Miles's head, and it's more like Miles' insecurities building. Because once Hobie shows up, not only is he like super supportive of Miles, but he low key kind of mentors him because like throughout the film Hobie is the character that like gives Miles advice, not just on like with his powers. Because like when Hobie's first introduced, he gives Miles advice about where Miles has this new power, where he specifically absorbs electricity from a technology and fires back. And he says, "You're using just your fingertips. What you gotta do is you gotta use your whole palm if you want it to work better." And this device ends up helping Miles later. But I specifically love how they write Hobie's like punk anarchy vibe to him. Like he's got this dude who's like completely confident in himself. He doesn't he's not flaky. He knows he knows who he is and what he's wants. He's completely confident and he says what he believes in without a hint of doubt. And he's not just like a like punk. He's not just like a guy a rock reference. He's specifically like an anarchist who opposes authority whenever he can and is constantly calling out those in power, which works really well when we see him throughout the film, like not only like point out the issues with Spider-Man 29 Spider Society, but he also on some level radicalizes Miles and is constantly like trying his best to keep Miles from getting like sort of like he makes sure Miles becomes suspicious of the organization and points out the problems with it. And like it makes you, I guess, if you could first see the movie, you question why Hobie would even join this organization. But I think it's clear that Hoagie is there to like to criticize the organization, to like keep it. Is very clear that Hobie joined the group because he saw something was wrong with it and he was looking for the right moment to like um to fight back against problems, and that becomes very clear when like Miles shows up, where he not. And I think what definitely causes Hobie to like recognize Miles's potential is when Miles ends up undoing a canon event by saving Spider-Man Inia's like Captain Stacy equivalent. And okay, so I think I've been doing a bit too much summarizing by this point, so I'm just gonna start listing off bullet points of stuff I really liked in film. I really like how like when they get to the Spider Verse headquarters place, Hobie is like taking off a bunch of random technologies off the wall, and like Miles tries to like call Hobie. Tells he tries to criticize Hobie for doing this, but we find out that there's a purpose behind all this, when later we find out that Hobie was using these pieces to build his own version of the interdimensional device that Gwen can use later, because he knows that Gwen is probably going to defect from the org just like he is. I love that when I love Peter B. Parker's introduction to this film, where we find out that like he and MJ have a baby now, and I just love how he's like in total dad mood this whole film, just like being super loving his daughter so much and just like geeking out about her whenever he can, like trying to show everybody pictures or like stop being in the middle of the fight so we can take pictures of her. It's super adorable, and I also love the jokes they make about how like Peter bringing his daughter into dangerous situations, probably a bad mood, but like he just loves her so much he can't be parted from her, which I think is adorable. And I also love the scene later where Peter B is trying to talk to Miles and explain what's going on. And he reveals that Miles is the reason why he had this kid, because Miles was the one who not only made him realize that he wanted to have kids, but like sort of gave him the belief to like go on and to keep. He basically gave Peter the strength to overcome his fears of having kids, which I really love, and I really love the intimate scene between them, which makes it all the more heartbroken when the intimate scene gets ruined when the other Spider people revealing that they've been tracking Peter's signal unbeknownst to him, and it feels to Miles like Peter B. Parker has betrayed him. I also really love the way Miguel is handled in this film. Like, yes, he isn't 100% comic book accurate, so they make him more serious and more stoic than he is in the comics, but I do think they distill some of the aspects of him because Miguel is a slightly more he isn't quite as optimistic as Peter is, as the other Spider-Man are, and he's a bit more harsh, he's a bit meaner, he's a little bit selfish, and I think the film is really able to distill those aspects in him, especially in his backstory, when they reveal that he accidentally destroyed the universe when he tried to replace a version of him that died in that world that was living an ideal life. Again, really good stuff. And I already mentioned before how he's so aggressive to Miles because he's projecting his own self-loathing onto him, which I think is like very interesting. Um, Other points I really like. I love how like Penny makes when like the other Spider-Man are trying to convince Miles that he has to let the can events happen because they could destroy the world, and then one of the people there who try some Miles he has to accept it is Penny, who makes a cameo, and she just looks so much more worn out and depressed. It's like so sad, but also it's so cool to see her again. And as I mentioned earlier, her design has been updated to be more accurate to her design in the comics, which looks so much better now. I also really love how during the scene in which all the other Spider-Men are like trying to talk to Miles and trying to explain that this is what it has to be,
Hobie is the one who's like encouraging Miles to get mad to talk against the people who are like sort of looking down at him. And when Jessica Drew says like you're not helping Hobie, Hobie's like good because yeah, that's why Hobie's here. He's the one trying to help Miles. He is the one here who is here to support Miles and help him realize the whole bullshit of this organization. It's so cool. I also love so many of the cameos in this film. There's so many fantastic cameos of all sorts of different Spider-Man, some new designs I haven't seen before, some like classic designs I'd love to see. Even the Spectacular Spider-Man cartoon makes an appearance, which I love. And also, I think that when they're doing this, when they're like showing Miles all the different scenes of like the Captain Stacy's death, I think the first one they actually show is supposed to be Spectacular Spider-Man and his Captain Stacy because it sounds like his voice. And I also really love how they not only show the original comics, whether they're depicting all these different can events, but during the Captain Stacy death, they also show his death from the Amazing Spider-Man movies. Because again, I really love how this film is like mixing different media, not just stop motion with like the Lego stuff, but also live action scenes when they not only use the scene from Amazing Spider-Man, but also the of course I mentioned there's a scene where Spot is in the Venom universe. But another really cool cameo in this love is where Miles talks to MCU Prowler because you can tell it's MCU Prowler because the same actor they got from it's the same actor they got from Spider-Man Homecoming to play Prowler, or at least Prowler before he gets his costume and tech, just like Aaron. And he's also Miles' uncle in the MCU movie as well, because he references he has this nephew that he doesn't want to get hurt, because that's why he lets Spider-Man know about the dangerous weapons. But yeah, he makes his cameo in this film in his full-on Prowler costume. And oh, now I remember the actor's name, Childish Gambino. Yeah, Childish Gambino. And I really love how he makes this cameo and even gets to have this whole conversation with Miles because like he was the actor who like inspired the creation of Miles because he was like outspoken about like because at the time they were thinking of doing a new reboot Spider-Man trilogy and he was the actor a lot of people suggested should play Miles and that sort of like gave Bendis the idea to do it to like once he kills off Peter Parker to replace him with a new character that was a full-on Black Spider-Man. And I don't know, just really cool that they brought him back for this cameo. And again, they do these a lot of cool cameos with the villains where they show like these different alternate versions of the villains. And I won't lie, I was a little bit disappointed that we didn't get to see Carnage because he's my favorite Spider-Man villain, but like that's fine. Also, in terms of the cameos, I I was really hoping that like the '90s cartoon Spider-Man would come in this film because he's like one of my favorite versions of the character, but I didn't see him. Maybe he does show up in the film in the background, but I couldn't tell. So if anybody has found him in this film, please let me know. And if he's not in this film, then I really hope he shows up in the next one. Though then again, I get the feeling we won't see like too many new Spider-Man in the next film because in the next film they probably just want to focus on like Miles, Spider-Man 29 and his crew, and the new team Gwen is forming. But yeah, other points. I kind of like how they handle Ben Riley in this film, aka the original Scarlet Spider. I really love how they make him look, where they add a lot of heavy shading to make him reminiscent of the '90s comics, and they also give him a more defined muscular physique in comparison to the other Spider-Man. Again, really good way of like making him like look very '90s. But I also love how they kind of write him as a sort of parody of like of the trends of '90s comics. You know, the overly angsty the way they talking like being obsessed with like the past and memories being again being very angsty being kind of like moody but also there's a sequence in which she's like he's having these full monologues about every action to do which is probably meant to be like a joke about like how like overly descriptive some 90s comics could be when they were like depicting the headspace of the characters. Again, I really love this joke, and well, I definitely can see some people upset because it's not a very accurate portrayal of Ben Riley, and it does feel a little bit like they make him a joke. I do think this works because none of these jokes feel like they're made by people who dislike the character. They all feel like they're made by people who clearly like Ben Riley and are just having fun. Like these are jokes made by somebody who is love these are the types of people jokes make about stuff they love, not jokes people make about stuff they hate. And they also like towards the end of the film, Spider-Man 29 does select him as part of his elite crew, so I think that does show he's got like potential. But yeah, I also there's a bit later where like Miguel is trying to escape back home and he's using like the go home device which like scans a person to get the DNA in their universe. And at first when they saw it, I was wondering like, wait, will that work? Because like Miguel was bitten by a spider from another universe and like
And then it's revealed that like Miguel didn't actually go back home. He got sent back to the universe where the spider that bit him came from. And that was so cool because like again they brought something I would think but didn't make it out obvious. But that does make me wonder if like because during the when Miles is trying to escape, there is a time to like abort the sentence, but like he looks pleadingly out like one of the other Spider-Man that is like monitoring it. She's like a Spider Woman who specifically like has a like VR technology and stuff. Like she's not physically there in this dimension. She's using VR technology to protect herself in that dimension, which I think is cool. But he looks at her pleading to take for her not to abort the system, and it makes me wonder like, did she know this was saying to Miles it's the wrong universe, and that's why she didn't abort it? But yeah, cool stuff. I also love the universe Miles gets into, where it's basically like a universe that never had a Spider-Man, and not only did his father die and is Aaron still alive, but it turns out in this universe, Miles became the Prowler, and I do like how they sort of like hide it away because like when Miles like first gets knocked out and like basically kidnapped by this world's Aaron, he thinks his Aaron is still the Prowler, only for reveal that no, he's not the Prowler, and then it turns out it's Miles, and it's like ooh, it's so cool getting like having an alternate version of Miles where he became the Prowler instead of like Spider-Man is such a really cool idea. Again, it's taking sort of that backstory, it's taking elements from the first film and extracting them even more and more dramatic potential. But another element that I really like is that like when we see the mural for Jeff, Miles' dad, it says rest in power. So it already gives you the implication that like the Miles of this universe is on a much darker path because of course you can tell that like Miles was clearly the one who made this mural, but also like again the phrase rest in power is just so much more ominous, so much more so much more, there's a slightly creepy villainous aspect to that line. So again, it's pulling you in on the aspect that this universe version of Miles is the Prowler, which I really like. And yeah, I was expecting when I realized that, like, okay, because I was thought, how can Aaron be the Prowler if we saw the Prowler knock like Miles out? So I was thinking, okay, either Miles is the Prowler, or maybe in this universe Peter became Prowler, since he probably never became Spider-Man because the Spider was removed. But making it Miles was the much smarter clue. And I have to say, I freaking love the cliffhanger that ends on this film with like Miles trapped in this alternate reality with a darker version of himself, whereas Gwen is assembling a new team of Spider-Man to help out Miles, which includes herself, Peter B. Parker, Spider-Man India, Spider-Punk, Penny, Spider-Man Noir, and Spider-Ham. So basically, it's confirming that yeah, we're getting back the old crew from the first film, of course, would want to help Miles because they're friends with him and they recognize it's wrong. We also get Spider-Punk, who again makes sense because again, Hobie was already he quit the organization in the film and was already very shady of it in support of Miles. So of course he's going to join to help this. And Spider-Man India makes sense because Miles, like he saved his equivalent of Captain Stacy. So even if his universe is now in jeopardy, there he'd still want to help Miles. Yeah, and I also really love Gwen's line at the end where she's like, I never quite found a band to fit in, but I think I finally found the right one." Because it's basically like cementing that this is the again that Gwen's character arc has sort of come full circle from the beginning of this film to the end, showing us because having the whole full circle thing be around Gwen's character, I think is really clever because it shows once again that this movie is just as much her story as it was Miles' story. Um, I also like I forgot to mention this earlier, but like the scene in which the Spot uses the alternate collider to become more powerful. I really like the way it's first framing, where like all the other where like Miles, Spider Gwen, Spider Punk and Spider Man India are all like webbing together to like try to keep Spot out from getting in the collider, and I really love how it's framed because it reminds me of the scene from the first movie, the Leap of Faith scene at the end of the first movie, where like Miles is holding Peter B. Parker over the collider, trying to instruct him to go back home. It's really cool because again, it's sort of taking that imagery from the first film, but giving this much darker, creepy lens. And I also love it that when Spot becomes full powerful, he becomes inverse, where he's now a black silhouette with these white holes around him. But instead of being like white ink spots, they're like instead of being like black ink spots like his previous spots, they're like these like white scribbles. And I just love how creepy and disturbing they make him look now. Like he's truly this interdimensional monster, and he looks even more 2D now, less like a 3D model, and more like this living scribble. It's so damn cool. And let's see, what other points did I want to make? Oh yeah, Insomniac Spider-Man makes a cameo in this scene where like they're looking at these different video games, and then in between them is it says like video game Spider-Man, and I love that joke, but I also think they actually used his actual like model from the game in here because he looked different from the other characters, which I think is cool. And he also, I swear he had a brief line in it, but it didn't sound like Yuri. But apparently, according to the Gress, it is Yuri Lowenthal. So I guess I just didn't hear it right. But yeah, that's all. I think yeah, that should be all I have to say about Across the Spider Verse. It's a really damn good movie. Would probably be my favorite movie of the year if it wasn't for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And yeah, I cannot wait to see this get resolved in the third movie next year. Yeah, this is absolutely one of my favorite movies, and it's just a pure spectacle, not just in visuals but also in writing. Just absolutely fantastic movie, and I can see some people being a bit like not liking this much as the first movie because it's a lot more of a setup film than a straight up like complete story like in the first film. But like it's damn good setup. Like it works so much well that I do ultimately like it more than the first movie. And Miles still has an arc, even though if you get the feeling that it won't reach its proper conclusion until the next movie. But like we also have Gwen, whose character arc is very much complete because again, this film is just as much hers as it is um Miles. Also, one last thing I forgot to mention, but like when we eventually like Gwen is of course fired from the organization by Miguel because of her like her clear like reluctancy to actually harm Miles and like the fact that she's like pushing against Miguel after the whole disaster. So yeah, she gets sent back to her own world where she finally confronts her dad, where she finds out that her dad basically quit the police force for her, even though he was going to be promoted captain, which I think is great because it not only shows that like to Gwen that her father truly loves her far more than he ever does his job or his responsibilities as captain. He was able to like give all that up for the sake of her, again help bring it into her character arc by like having her and her file be able to reconcile as well as showing just how much he loves his daughter. But it's also important because it basically shows that like canon events can be prevented without like the threat of the end of the world because her dad would have died if he had remained captain, but basically by him quitting, by him no longer becoming Captain Stacy, he's proving that Miles is right, that canon events can in fact be prevented and that we are not stuck to them. It is, and I think that's just so cool because basically Gwen realizing that Miles is right, and it gives Gwen the confidence to like help Miles to like again because she's already been leaning on that side, she's been on that edge, and like this moment is where she finally stands that yes, she has to help Miles and she has to save her friend. And it's all just really good. Just a fantastic movie. Seriously, watch this film if you haven't. It's one of the best films to come out this year by none. Anyway, thank you all for watching my podcast. If you like this and want to see more of my videos, then you can always check out the rest of my channel and subscribe. And remember to hit the notification bell so you don't miss anything important. And again, if you like this video, please leave a like and um, leave me any comments to think like what you thought of this video, if you agreed with my points, if you disagreed, or if you have any ideas of what I could do to make this series better. Thank you for watching and see you guys later.